In the distant future, vampires rule the night, but their numbers are dwindling. One podcast is unlike all the others. Half human, half vampire. This is Lefty Speaks, the official podcast for Vampire Hunter D.
Hello, hunters, and welcome back to Lefty Speaks, the Vampire Hunter D podcast. We're going to continue diving in here with episode 11 on our commentary and breakdown of Bloodlust. So, where we left off, we are now getting ready to leave Barbaroi in the movie and get into the chase out of the town, where Grove has come through and just wrecked the place and decides to try his luck while feeling Superman invincible, all astro projection power on D. And I guess, the skill is in the wielder, since D's sword cut his spirit apart. After which, but prior to that, I think got a cool moment for Bengi, because, he took the hit from Grove and was like, I can keep going. So I found that rather interesting bit of use of action for character development in this scene, because you got to show that Bengi has, some amazing supernatural powers to give a bit of foreshadowing to what's coming, and even more so than where he was, what we previously saw. Then there's D showing the fact that, his powers are beyond the norm. You used a sword to cut a spirit being. That's, I think it's exposition without anyone ever having said anything. And I love that in movies and television, because you get the chance to show and not tell. And that's something I think you see a lot of productions where they forget how important that is. And you wonder, like, man, this just seems off or not as good. And when you stop to think about it, because it's pulled you out a bit of the immersion, you're like, oh, that's why they were telling and not showing.
I find it very interesting too, because I was thinking of this as if this was a TTRPG and you were rolling the dice on whether or not that sword attack would impact an astral being. And this goes back to what we were saying in the Act 1, when I've wondered what is really in the bag of tricks of Vampire Hunter D's powers, as well as the sword's abilities. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, because at the end of Act 3, we see like a parallel to a previous sword. But it's very interesting. So, because I was looking at some TTRPGs over the last couple of weeks and playing Battletech. And that's all math. And I was just thinking about dice, and I'm just like, what would have been the odds of rolling something that would have sliced up an astral being? And also, what is in that bag of tricks of power? So I think that's something I would love to talk more about on the Discord as we go further. And it's just very cool, that scene with him slicing up the astral form. Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there's when in Dungeons and Dragons, when we had deities and demigods, the book came out, and and Legends and Lore, I think, was the kind of the follow-up to that. But there was lots of discussions as to, because they put stats to deities and and gods and demigods, and there's lots of arguing at that time,
like Tiamat.
Who could win, Odin or Zeus? And so it's like, but that brings up a really interesting question. Is that how would you stat deep? And like, what do we know? Like, we already know his pendant is special. We know his sword is special. What else? What else? And is that him, or is it the sword?
Something else,
or is it
right?
Both? Like, what is it? It's super interesting. And even at book 30, we're still asking those questions.
I remember getting in a let's call it a discussion / argument going back and forth with here in LA at a local game convention at Strategicon with a bunch of the Pathfinder people and the Pathfinder Venture local captains, because Wes Schneider, the game designer, who was the lead game designer at Paizo for years, he's a Vampire Hunter D fan. So when I asked, he was more than happy to create us that module that we gave everybody PDF copies of in the last Kickstarter. And in it, he had made the Vampire Hunter Bounty Hunter, specialty class. And I remember getting in an argument with a couple of people because the venture captains, a couple of them did not want to see it allowed in society play because it was too good of a class. It had bumped up stats. I think instead of a D4 or D6, he gave it a D8 for one of the conditions. And so people are like, no, this is too powerful compared to everything else you could play. It's a broken class. I'm like, well, yeah, it's based off Vampire Hunter D. It's
right.
How is it going to be? Yeah. Yeah. And so we have seen some statting based on D and the lore. And I thought it was fun because Wes, when I first started getting to know him through all the people I know at Paizo, one of the things he pointed out to me was he's a big fan of Vampire Hunter D, and he gave me, yes, it is on the shelf here. He gave me this. He wrote an homage story in the Pathfinder setting, and this character, she's a Dhampir.
Nice.
And it's set in one of the undead kingdoms in Galarian.
Nice.
And so we have seen a statting of D for TTRPG in Pathfinder First Edition.
Right. You actually gave me that module. I actually have a print copy of the Vampire Hunter D module. And when I read through it, it made me, I have that sitting someplace.
Yep, me too.
One of the things I thought about was, and a lot of folks are going to hopefully know what I'm talking about, but in the video game, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, who looks exactly like, Alucard looks exactly like D. If you ever played it, the first mission, you are fully powered. You have all the weapons. And then somebody comes along and strips all your weapons away, and you're just starting off at absolute base zero. And that made me wonder, what would happen if you cut off his left hand, took away his amulet, took away his sword, and you started him at like just a straight base character? What would his stats be? And then what would those added items do for his damage and speed, agility, intelligence, dexterity, and so forth and so on? That's something I always think about. And I was thinking about that while we were watching, we were all talking about and rewatching Bloodlust, because I always do think, jumping ahead when he fights, Caramella, like things just happen to save him. And it's never explained exactly what saved. Even in the first movie, when he's fighting Count Magnus Lee, and Lee's like, wait a minute. He looks at the picture on the wall. He's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, my God, you're able to do that? And I've always been like, wow, this is such a Deus Ex Machina or Deus Ex Lucifer, whatever you want to say, where things just kind of save him. And I'm not saying this is a negative, but I've always just wondered what would be the layering of him,
Yeah.
Just something I think about,
Yeah, like what, because we know he's the son of Dracula.
Right.
And I mean, even though not everyone in the books do, right? And so what? And obviously, the Dracula is this omni-powerful godlike being in the D universe. So being effectively a demigod is almost what D really is.
Right.
And what powers are just innate? Like, is he? What immunities might he have? Or
natural,
or
right.
resistances, like clearly he has some resistance to like some types of mental control and magic, where he's not completely immune, but because sometimes he needs Lefty to help him out on
many times,
many
times.
So and that is cool, because because of Lefty, he might be OP, but never completely immune. He, in every book, there's some chance that he could die. There's, that where he's actually gravely in danger, and that's cool. And we see it, in the movie as well.
And right there in the next scene following the chase, as he's going after the carriage, he gets trapped in the spell by Bengi. And he straight up says, "Help me out here," to Lefty to help break the spell. And I think you also get the bit of show and not tell when Bengi's got his contract for the spell, his finger string thing, and it breaks, and you see the look of surprise, and like he's aghast that what? How? That shouldn't be possible. I just, again, I like the layering of we're showing, not telling, and it's done in, half a second of, oh, wait a minute. He's, okay, D's more powerful than they expected.
Always.
Yeah.
I always love their look of surprise. In every book, there's like, wait a minute, how is he able to do this? He should be dead now,
Yep. And I also love the next scene that we get into, because the Marcus brothers are chasing them. And so you have, I believe her name in the movie was Caroline. She just jumps off, and how many people would casually just stand in front of a tank rushing at them to be hit by the tank? And that was their plan, is to get run over by the tank, so they're now attached under the tank. And I guess my one problem with this scene is that the Marcus group having a little too much plot armor in this scene for me. Nobody got injured.
It was weird because they were inside and they were in a closed space, and she does the poison ivy spiky thing and like just perforates the entire thing. I mean, when I was seeing this, I always go back to when I saw this in Boston, at the Brattle Theater, and I was sitting there and we were all like, come on, like, what's happening? Like,
somebody should at least be injured here.
Punctured, sliced, thorn. I can't even pick up, I can't run through a rose bush without getting sliced up. This woman is using thorns to attack them, but I'm not going to complain. It was just a little bit much there. Yeah,
this scene, I think, is the biggest pull me back, like, wait a minute scene in the movie. And it's just, I get it if you don't want to add time of dealing with injuries, because if somebody was injured, then you're going to have to spend the time of how do they get treated. And I think in the world of Vampire Hunter D, you could quickly gloss it over if, you got they have some, serum injectable whatnot that they stole from the Frontier Defense Force or something like that. Yeah. And somebody just takes the auto injector and hits them right by the spot, and, the green goo.
Star Trek has that, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there would have been ways around it, but if you're paying attention to your budget, I can see why you would make the choice they made, because an extra 20 to 30 seconds of animation is not cheap.
At $500,000 probably.
Yeah.
but
because it does hand drawn, yeah.
It does demonstrate, though, how dangerous. I think really it was really just to show how dangerous she was and what she could take, and then move on, because when she does do her full thing when they're in the forest, she is formidable. I think her death scene is kind of nonsense, but beyond that, it was an amazing battle with Caroline. I mean, good God, she was intense. And I would have loved it. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that scene was great for more of the show don't tell of her power, and it set up well the next scene, that she gets back on the carriage and takes off. And I find it interesting, from the Barbaroi perspective, that there's also, I would call it, a lot of arrogance in believing we're better than everyone else, because Bengi stays behind to fight them by himself because he's already killed one of them. He trapped D. So it makes sense to a certain extent that they believe that, oh, these are just humans. What do we have to truly worry about? I'll take care of them. You guys keep going. You know, we've got a contract. And I like the fact that for the Marcuses, they're not stupid about it. They listen to what Nolt said, that what his death bought them for information, they put to good use. And I think that is something that is really important, that if you have characters that you're portraying as competent, make them competent. Don't cause them all of a sudden to get stupid in a scene because it's convenient. No, I love the fact that they're smart about it. They were ruthless about it. And yeah, we're in a bad spot, but we're going to, counter trap the guy who's here to trap us. And I think that's a great bit of more show, don't tell. And they made a cool fight scene out of it too. I guess I wish Kyle got a little more fight time. I like the convertible dagger to cross boomerang thing. It's just
Very
a cool
Ninja
idea.
Scrolls, yeah.
I feel like they just needed to kind of cut the herd a bit and keep it moving, because there was a lot of fat, and there's always a bunch of moving parts in these movies, and it felt like they were just trying to. And cause I felt the same way, and I also think after watching it, I'm like, how much did it cost to animate that? Because Kyle was very lithe, just like Bengi, and it was very. The movement. We haven't talked a lot about the physical movement in this film was like butter. Like you could take a hot sword through butter, and that's how smooth. I never felt like it was herky-jerky. Like the in-between animation was like fully done. I didn't feel like they were taking any shortcuts. I was making jokes last time about some of the character designs because I thought some of them were a little bit wacky. But in terms of the physical movement of the fights, the movement of the carriages, the horse movement, the capes, especially the fight with Meyer and D on the carriage, with the capes, and the fact that Meyer's capes turns into a giant blade, but then it goes back to being cloth, and then D being able to like block it and parry. It was just extraordinary work, and I don't know how they pulled that off. But again, I always think we were spoiled so much in the late 90s, early 2000s, because I did not appreciate what I was watching because I was surrounded, inundated, in a deluge of just gorgeous animation. And now looking back, of the weird cell shading of the last, 15 years and lack of hand drawn, I'm like, I really do appreciate what they did with Bloodlust. And I like, is that one of the last fully hand drawn, like animated features?
I believe so.
Out of Japan? Because everything else after that, even when I think about the Gundam movies, a lot of them have a lot of CGI.
I believe so. Yeah.
Other than Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli, who else is really doing full, like, because not even Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer has a lot of CGI elements in it.
Yeah.
I think about. And One Piece definitely does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will give this that I think CGI in the last number of years has been improving.
Somewhat. You can depend on what you watch.
Yeah. Some of it is still really, really jarring.
Yeah.
And I guess it goes back to, you don't appreciate what you have until you don't have it anymore sometimes.
Right.
And I loved some of the older art style. And I think you can still get some incredibly gorgeous, beautiful production today. I don't necessarily want to completely lament the changing of the times, changing of technique and technology and circumstances. But I think back then, I think you got a little more emphasis on quality. And in the last few years, it seems, the machine has to keep going. So stuff gets made to meet the schedule. And if you're not Miyazaki or Makoto Shinkai, you don't get as much, freedom. It's kind of like here, Christopher Nolan, Denis Villeneuve, they want to make a movie.
The practical effects too. Yeah.
They're going to get to do what they want to do. The majority of people, though, no, you gotta fit the mold. You gotta be a part of the machine, be the cog. And I think in any entertainment industry, unless you manage to be, the standout, or you're trying to work on the periphery of the system, you don't get that freedom to demand, no, it's got to look this way. No, I want to shoot on film and plan for IMAX. Who else gets to do that? James Cameron for Avatar, for wanting to shoot in 3D. Nolan wanting to plan for IMAX.
Yeah.
Who else? It's
also, we have to remember that a lot of the stuff we're talking about, whether it's like Akira or Bloodlust, they were designed from the very beginning to be released in theaters as a feature film, right? And so there is, a big difference in the planning stage, the development, when you're developing for an animated series, and you're budgeting out for anywhere from 10 to 30 episodes, depending upon where you're at, versus something you're going to put on the big screen. I mean, and I know, whether it's Resident Evil or whether it's My Little Movie Sushi Girl, we also, when you're planning for the big screen, you have to make adjustments. It's like there's like, like Sushi Girl, we had a budget originally of $200,000, and wow. That's such a tiny budget for a feature film, and we filmed it really well. But then at a certain point, I had to go to our investors and say, okay, we're now in the post-production phase. And if we're going to just go direct to DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, we're going to do it one way and we can keep the budget down. But if we're going to go to a theatrically released film, which we'd always wanted to do, but when the budget hits and you have to make those plans, it's like, okay, now we have to increase our VFX budget so we can clean things up, because a small error on a tire, on a TV screen, no one's going to notice, because in Sushi Girl, the van flipped and the safety cable wrapped around the van so that it wouldn't fall onto the 101 freeway. And so we had to erase that. And and there was tiny little bits that didn't completely get, because of the wheels were moving. It was harder to remove certain things. And it's like, okay, you got to move on. We got to move on, But if it's on a big screen, you can't move on. You have to clean that out. And I'm sure I'm not an expert on all the intricacies of the differences between a feature film, animated feature film, and an animated series. But I'm sure there's a lot of compromises that you have to let go of, and you just have to go, all right, we have to go bigger budget for some of these choices, and I think it shows.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on something, actually what both of you were saying. So I'll give you examples of what I mean when I talk about the shifts. So in terms of quality CGI feature anime, like Gundam Hathaway's Flash, had heavy CGI elements. If you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. Absolutely beautiful. There's some sequences that are absolutely astonishing. There's one moment I think about, you can see it in the trailer, where he's embracing the blonde woman and there's a mech explosion with sparks flying past them. And it's just like this gorgeous, gorgeous shot. And another one, obviously, would be Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time, which uses a really nice sensuous, and I'm using sensuous, blend of CGI and hand-drawn. But it fades more toward the CGI, yet it's absolutely beautiful. And those who've seen Thrice Upon a Time, the final shot is one of the best final shots in any anime movie I've ever seen, period. Yeah. The last 30 seconds. Now I'll give you one where it's deeply more of a problem. Ghost in the Shell 1 mainly hand-drawn, some CGI. Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence, heavy CGI, absolutely horrible looking, compared to the first one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Many hearts
It
were
hurt.
broken.
It hurt.
Yeah.
Watching Innocence. So I feel like I agree with you, Scott, that, there are some beautiful uses of it. I'm not against. I'll tell you something that you wouldn't even think I would notice. There was something called Zoid's Wild Senki, and it's like 10-minute. It's some of the most beautiful CGI. It's Zoids, but the fight scenes are absolutely gorgeous, and it's mainly CGI, 2D, with some 3D, overlay. But the bottom line is, I feel that I miss a lot of the warmth of hand-drawn. I mean, there's stuff from Lotus Wars, I remember. There's stuff from even something like Riding Bean, which is an obscure racing and, like a street like race / detective story. Even, what was it, The Dirty Pair? I mean, Gunsmith Cats. I'm talking about like some of the smaller ones that kind of got traction here in the States. But anyway, getting back to D, I just felt like, the movement was just, I felt underappreciated by me at the time. And now looking back, I'm like, good God, I wish more stuff looked like this.
Yeah, it's really smooth. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I like your point that it wasn't just the fight scenes that they focused on, but it was, you could see the care done to the whole movie, not just the hero moments. And I think that's very telling because your hero moments, you've got to look good, but you've got to, you notice if the whole package isn't there. So, no, I really do like that. Let's see. So, after the fight scene, Bengi dies. They figure out the repair, which moves our plot along because we saw, previously in getting trapped in the spell, horse fell to its death, so D no longer has a ride. Which, with them all conveniently supplying the information that there's a town nearby, so
Right.
we'll go get a new fuel tank and we'll do repairs. Hey, great combo, and it's made sense of why they would cross paths in the town. They both need to resupply, and it's the most convenient to where they're at. Which, the following, there's one scene in between here, but it leads to one of my favorite scenes in the movie, is the scene in this town. Prior to that, just in between these two, you get this brief snippet of Meyer reading the invitation from Carmilla, which brings great counterpoint to all the things that we've learned about Carmilla prior, and that we learn from not Meyer's perspective. So Meyer has this offer of, I want to help you, come, I'll get you to space. My reputation is, my detractors from thousands of years ago. There are too few of us. She really put her best foot forward. That good old PR marketing spin. And I liked that just that little scene, she's selling him the hope of exactly the thing he wants that he can't get for himself and Charlotte. And, I think that's just great villain setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she seems to be a beacon of hope. Just get to that castle. That's all we got to do. It reminds me of the house at the end of Blair Witch Project.
Shelter!
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we get past the invitation and we get to town where, they do the transaction. They see D coming into town. Layla is still on her, I hate this guy. He's got to be evil. I'm going to cause problems for him. And, waits for the sheriff, gets the sheriff riled up, and off you go. And I think this scene of her in the bar with the sheriff highlights something I've heard people complain about for years of why, just for this movie, when it was Dhampir in all of the books, everywhere, why did they change it to call him a Dunpeal?
I was going to ask that question too, because I remember when me and you first met, Scott, I was like, what's the difference between Dunpeal and Dhampir? Which one is like the N word? I was trying to figure that out.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I thought, because I was trying to figure out which one was the bad one,
As far as I know, Dunpeal was never used anywhere else in the franchise. By the way, I love the Akira mug. It was never used anywhere else in the franchise other than this Bloodlust adaptation. So I have no idea why somebody decided that this needed to be changed for the movie. Now, there are a lot of changes they made between Book 3, Death Chase, and Bloodlust that make a lot of sense for the movie. And as Neal pointed out in some of our pre-record session conversations, this next scene with Polk, the old man selling the horse, wasn't in Demon Death Chase. But as far as character development moments, this is one of my top 2 favorite scenes in the movie. To me, it has just such a great emotional weight to it. Especially as you talk about, I would say it encapsulates survivor's guilt, the fear, racism, and hatred that Dee gets, his choice to be different, and people when their reaction when confronted with their prejudice, and that just strange truth. I love this scene because it does so many things that in just those few seconds, you feel from Polk's character a lifetime of regret. As a kid, realizing how wrong it was, the way Dee was treated. And he's an old man, he's towards the end of his life, and he's that moment of, I could stand up for what's right now. This may ruin my life, it may end my life, I don't know what's going to happen after this, but I've waited my whole life for a chance to say thank you and repay the guy that saved our lives. And I love the emotion of that scene. And towards the end of it, it's Layla finally, you could see it's changing her a bit. Through the rest of the movie is her learning that changes her attitude, and she starts to grow and change and heal as a person. So I love everything that was encapsulated into this scene for that just emotional ride.
Yeah, and there's very few ways to do it in that way because of the characters, the cast that we currently have, right? So you have to have that outside perspective that Layla can see, and that because Dee's not going to brag about himself. He's not like that. So I mean, you're kind of left with Lefty to basically tell people off, like, oh, hey, he did that, right? Which is so much exposition. This was such a brilliant, very layered approach to really give a lot of information in a really short scene that also had basically like a a standoff, which was also cool, and also reflected a lot about different people's personalities. So yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely one of my favorite scenes in the film.
Yeah. And I also like that it highlights the idea that Dee has been doing this and been consistent as a character of do the right thing, even when you get a response of hatred for decades. It implies centuries in this scene. You have this, what looks to be like a 70, 80-year-old man going, I was one of them kids. That's implying nearly a century.
Yep.
That Dee did this thing, but he let them run him out of town. He was there to rescue the kids. And he quite clearly, didn't get paid, and, they broke their contract with him. But he let it go. He didn't massacre them. You see from the town scene that the town is just fine. There's no lore of, the Dhampir who came through, or Dunpeal, who came through town and wiped them out. So I think it was just a great testament to Dee's character, that continued of, it doesn't matter how the world comes at me, I choose how I respond, and I choose to take the higher road. I choose, my personal choices are about what it does for me as a person. I will be different than the nobility. And I love that, because I think that's something that, especially in literature and storytelling, we could use a lot more of, is the character is making choices based on who they want to continue being, to not be what they don't want to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we could benefit a lot from in life.
I want to add one more thing to that, and that is it also very subtly puts time in a bit of perspective, because to Dee, that's something that was just a casual event that happened, obviously 70, 80 years ago. But to Dee, that was just a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple months ago, maybe at most. For someone who has that long of a life, they don't even need to point it out, but it's right there, right in front of you. That, it's just one of thousands and thousands of encounters that Dee has had that's just like this.
It very much reminds me of the William Money character in Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, where he's trying not to be that person, and there's like this legend of William Money that precedes him. And it's just, I was just thinking about what we was talking about the past and how much time has passed and the lore. It just reminds me of William Money a lot, the killer of women and children. And then Clint Eastwood's character says, that's right, I've killed just about everything that moves or lives. And now I'm going to kill you. But it just reminds me of like the whole backstory of a person who had this lore about him. Yet, unlike William Money, Dee did not slaughter an entire village. And that's a very interesting thing about what is the innate goodness of Dee, and what is good and just in this world where everything is so skewed and morally gray. Because it seems to me, to survive in the Vampire Hunter D universe, as a human especially, you have to delve deep into the gray area all the time.
It's a rough one.
Thank you for listening to Lefty Speaks, the official Vampire Hunter D podcast, hosted by Brandon Easton, Neal Fischer, and Scott McLean. This podcast is created by Unified Pictures and 9 Realms. Narration by Lauren Evallen-Muller. Recording and editing by 9 Realms. Produced by Scott McLean and Ian E. Muller. Based on the works created by Hideyuki Kikuchi. Happy hunting.